My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm speaking with Drew Neisser. He is the founder of Renegade, which is the award-winning strategic boutique for business-to-business innovators. And he also founded CMO Huddles. It is the fastest growing, most engaged community of business-to-business chief marketing officers on the planet. He founded CMO Huddles in 2020, whereas Renegade he founded back in 1996. He earned his bachelor's in history from Duke University. I guess it would make sense that he is a huge fan of Ben Franklin as well. And currently you live in Manhattan. And wait, I wanted to mention—
That's true.
I also wanted to mention that, Drew, you've been featured, a featured marketing expert on ABC News, CNBC, CBS Radio, and Tony Robbins' podcast, among many others. Before we dig into really talking about your book, Renegade Marketing, which you just released, I'd like to get a feel for really where you cut your teeth. What were some of your influences? Really, what kind of set you on the path to found these businesses?
Well, it's funny. I've listened to a couple of your shows, which I enjoy. And so thank you for having me, Dave. And thank you for doing this work. I know how hard it is to do a podcast and how much time and energy. So I really appreciate that you do it. And it's great to be with you. I listened to your guests and they seem to go back to childhood. And so I started thinking about that as in preparation for this show. And there are a number of influences that sort of do speak to some of the things that I've been able to do in my career. I was the youngest of three boys. And so in some ways that had a huge impact on it. And I was 6 years younger than my oldest. And both of my brothers were really intense academic intellectuals. And so the space in my house was on the jock side of things. So I went there. And my dad, who was also very bright, man. I had actually recorded a podcast with him, my 100th episode of my show, and is a huge influence on me in many ways. But I'll tell you one story that sort of was probably the most profound. Is we'd play catch a lot, and it wouldn't matter what the ball was, whether it was a baseball or a football or a basketball. And we'd do the things which you always do as a kid, right? Where you'd go to catch the winning catch in football, right? On the sideline, 1 foot in, because it's college rules, and you'd be on the sideline catching it. And I'd drop it sometimes and I'd catch it sometimes. And my dad kept saying, if you can touch it, you can catch it. And it was such an interesting way of putting it. And at the time, I think he was just trying to get me to not make excuses. But there was another side to it, which was this optimism that if you can touch it, you can catch it, right? And so there was this, he sort of took excuses out of my sort of vocabulary, which is, and then I ended up becoming a tennis player where you're all on your own, right? And it's all about if you can get your racket on it, you should be able to get it back over the net. But the optimism that informed so many of the things in my life, even when things were bad, it became part of the spirit of, as you describe it, from embers to excellence, is being able to find the opportunity, because that optimism of if you can catch it, if you can touch it, you can catch it. And so, I mean, I could give you tons of examples growing up of things that didn't quite go my way that ended up going my way. And so I'll stop there because that was a lot on that.
Well, you had mentioned that you grew up in Southern California, and now years later, you're living in the Northeast and successful businessman. I'm really curious about how, I mean, it's completely different lifestyles.
Yeah. So I went to Duke, which is in North Carolina, because the Neisser boys go east. That's just the way it was. So I went to Duke, got my 4 years, and then I went home to California to get a job. And I knew I wanted to either be in film or in the advertising marketing business. And I ended up getting a job at a national agency, but local, literally in Newport Beach, California, called Wellsrich Green. And after about 2.5 years, I decided that I was learning everything you weren't supposed to do in the business. I felt that. I felt like every lesson was backwards. And I wasn't really learning how to be a great marketer. And so I thought, well, and everybody said you have to go to New York, and you go to New York and you get your 2 years experience, and then you go back to California and you're New York trained, and then you can do whatever you want. So concurrently, I said, well, maybe I want to go to film school. So I applied to film school, to 2 film schools, screwed up my applications to both. This is one of those ashes to embers thing, and said, all right, well, that's fate. I'll go to New York for a week and see if I can get a job, which I did. I got 2 offers in a week and started in literally 1982 in New York City. I always with the thought at JWT that I would be there a couple of years. Well, first I started making incredible friends and building a life in New York City. And eventually I thought I'd get back to California, except then I met the woman of my dreams, my wife, Linda, who is from Buffalo, New York, and she loves the seasons. And as a result, California, not an option. And so, again, if we come back to the optimistic theme, is I can make a great life wherever I am, because that's just sort of who I am. It's like, I'll pick up a racket, I'll get on a tennis court, I'll make some friends, they'll be buddies, we'll build a community, and off we go. And so it's, New York City is a wonderful place. Would I have spent 40 years in Newport and been happy? Yeah. But I've made a very nice life for myself in New York City. So it's just funny how things end up.
Yeah. But New York is one of my favorite cities. It took me a long time to make my way up there. But my cousin, she moved up there right out of college. And I was like, man, she's crazy. But she met the man of her dreams. He graduated from NYU with his master's, and they're living the dream. I'm with your wife. The seasons are amazing up there. I was born and raised in Florida, and we get 2 seasons.
Yes.
A little bit cold and hot.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that for anybody who's listening who's under 30, New York City in your 20s, particularly when you're single, it's hard to imagine a more fun place because there is such a concentration of single people and in almost any industry, but particularly in the advertising industry or the media or, Wall Street or whatever area that New York offers you. And so, and because of the concentration, they always talk about New Yorkers being tough, but really it's just it's a veneer. And I've met incredible people in New York, and yeah, they're a little tough on the outside because, there are a lot of people, and you got to be able to, but I've made tremendous friends here and there. But the 20s, man, it's fun. New York City is fun.
What led you into marketing and advertising? Like, how did you move in that direction?
Well, so that goes back. So a couple of things. One, I actually had a grandfather who had an advertising agencies in the 30s. And he founded this agency with another gentleman in Milwaukee. And then they won the Wrigley's business. It was called Neisser Meyerhoff. And they won the Wrigley business. And then eventually my grandfather, this is the story, his doctor said, I think this business is going to kill you. You better get out. So he left and went on to work for one of the clients and ended up being president of that, of Weiler's of all things. But the real thing that got me into advertising is out of college, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I took 2 months on a sort of camping around Europe tour. It was as cheap as I could do it. And what I found, and I've always loved photography, and I found myself taking pictures of every poster that I saw, street poster or billboard. And I was just fascinated by, I mean, what was it that drew me to it? And it was this sort of, how do we combine words and pictures to sort of stop you and get you involved in a story? And I just, the camera told the story for me when I got home, and I looked at all my pictures and I said, you know, there are more pictures of posters than are beautiful buildings here. That's, you know, you're obviously interested in it. And so it was easy for me to say, yeah, this is probably, communications is probably a good business. Okay, my grandfather did it. How hard can it be? But, you know, I've always been interested in communications and the media world at large.
What led you to pursue a degree in history?
So again, this goes back to my family and sort of their sense of what college is about. And college is about teaching you to think, not preparing you for actual practical skills. That's what the notion of a liberal arts college is. And history is one of those subjects in my house that, you know, instead of talking, we ended up having debates about, you know, this battle in World War II, where, you know, we're just this, it's a family of history buffs, and it has been. And I'm the dumb one in the family, just to be clear on that, relative to the rest of my family and their knowledge. But I know more about Ben Franklin than they do, because I specialized in Ben, and they're more generalists. They have much broader, but I'm a specialist. So majoring in history was just a good, and I focused on American history. So it's not surprising that I ended up Franklin. But the Franklin story is funny because I came to Franklin through marketing, and we had a philosophy that we were developing in 2000, in about 2005, 2006 at Renegade, that marketing could be, we were looking at the world and it's like, it's pollution. Remember all those posters that I took? They were beautiful in Europe. They looked like works of art. And we were seeing pollution. And so we said, you know what, maybe marketing can be a form of service and can do something amazing and not be polluting. So we came up with this idea of marketing as service. And I started looking around for ways of describing what this was. And I ran across Ben Franklin's phrase, well done is better than well said. And that literally, and I know it's a pun, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. It's like, well done is better than well said. And had spent so much of my career focused on words. I've ended up writing a lot of taglines and things for a lot of companies, but it's the actions that make marketing successful. It's the things that you do as a company, as an individual, that it's all about your actions. Yeah, you know, we all know the phrase is not what you say, it's what you do, but you don't think about that from a marketing. So I was so interested in Franklin that I then started researching. And then I realized, after reading 25 books on him and all around him, is that he was America's first chief marketing officer. And so imagine this is your marketing challenge. You're going to go sell a revolution to a king. Off you go. That's it. You got no money. You got no negotiation power. You got nothing. All you got is a brand name, because he was the most famous American at the time. And he had a brand name. So he goes to France, and it takes him a long time, but he gets it done. And if it's not for France, we don't have the weapons, we don't have the soldiers, we don't have the bullets, we don't have the clothes, and frankly, we don't have the money. And so we don't win without France's participation. So he's America's first chief marketing officer.
I never looked at it that way. That's pretty cool. You said something a minute ago about, you know, the liberal arts education is really meant to teach you how to think rather than like give you tangible skills. It's really to help shape your thinking. And it made me think of a couple of books that I've read based on the grand strategy program at Yale. And I actually used really that thought process in my book. It's a group of 4 professors that developed this program, and their idea was that they wanted to teach young men and women who will likely be leading our country how to think and develop a grand strategy, but they did so by, well, beginning with the great works of strategy, The Art of War, and Clausewitz, the history of the Peloponnesian War. Well, a lot of historical references there where they study it to the point where they can pick it apart and say, all right, now we're, several hundred years later, 1,000 years later, and these are the mistakes that they made. This is where they did well. How can we apply that in today's world, these lessons? And how can we train ourselves to think? And I feel like maybe that's kind of what you were saying, being so heavy on the history, that what a great way to learn how to think. And using Ben Franklin as an example, how to develop a marketing strategy and seeing the things that he did. Am I close on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things, and yeah, definitely on this that, well, from a liberal, I always say when folks, and in fact, I'm going down to Duke to talk to some students, undergrads, and they ask me, how do I prepare for career in marketing if they do? I say, well, write, just write. And you write because if you write, you understand. And for me, oftentimes I don't understand something clearly until I write it down. Well, it takes a lot of work to become a decent writer, and college is a great opportunity to sort of stretch your writing skills. I have to admit, I didn't become a good writer until after college. I wasn't very good, as good as I would have liked to have been, but I wasn't as disciplined as I would have liked to have been in college. I had a lot of things going, a lot of fun stuff going, and a lot of other extracurriculars that helped me, by the way, sort through what I liked and didn't like. Like I worked at a TV station as an intern and doing news, and I thought, okay, that I didn't enjoy that process, so that's off the table. I worked as a photographer. I love that, but I didn't want to do it as a career. So I used college also, not just to learn history, but to sort of eliminate and learn what I liked to do. And one of the things, I ran a film series, and I got to do the marketing for the film series. I love that, because when 300 people showed up instead of 100 people showed up, I felt really good about it, because I was selling this product of the movie that week that I was very proud that we had selected. But I think, going back to your question, liberal arts education, while it doesn't teach you how to be a leader necessarily, it does help you learn how to analyze problems, how to bring different ideas together into one thing. And one of the things so interesting about how academics have changed is they're much less siloed than they were. And you'll see a history person working with a science person, and a science person, I know this is happening at Duke a lot, and so the blending of this thinking is really interesting now on a college level. You'll see so much more, whereas it used to be very siloed. And that was problematic, because there was a history way of thinking and an English way of thinking. And now it's much more broad. And I do want to make one point, which I think is this is me just getting wrapped in my underwear, is I don't think history repeats itself. I think history there are echoes, and there are things that you can learn. But if you imagine you're a marketer in 2021 versus 1920, and you look at what the marketing challenge was then and versus the way it would be today, it's very different. It's really different. I mean, it was a homogenous society for the most part. It was a limited range of media. Now you're not everything's very, very different. And in history, it's always that same way too. They're different players and they're different countries and so forth. So you can learn from history a lot, but you always have to bring your present day lens to it as well. But what to me, the next part of this thing, and this is fascinating, is great leaders are empathetic. They have and I noticed, like in my book, I talk about what Deloitte does with their university. They teach empathy, which I think is so amazing. It's like, wait, that's something that's teachable? Yeah, it is. So anyway, I went off sorts of educational tangents there, but I'll let you bring us back.
I'm still thinking about your passion for marketing, Ben Franklin, giving back, and you've done a lot in your life, and I'm curious, after college, let's say post bachelor's degree, what are you most proud of?
First, I would say my kids, who are both grown-ups and are fully functioning off the payroll, and they're just delightful human beings. And so that's accomplished, very basic, but proud that I'm a good partner, I think, to my wife. If she listens to the show, she can write in her answer. And I've been a good son to my dad, God bless him, who's 95 and still going strong. And so then I get to business accomplishments, and there are a couple of things I'm really proud of. One is that over the years, Renegade has gone up and down and up and down. But if you talk to anybody who ever worked at Renegade, most of the time they say it was their favorite place to work. And that makes me very happy. They really had a great, in some cases, a seminal experience. That's part one. Part two is giving back to my university. We've had over 25 Dukies be interns or start their careers at Renegade. And that makes me feel good, because that was something I never expected I could give back to the university, who is so, I've always been grateful they let me in. And then, you get to modern now, where in 2020, and this sort of gets to the ashes to embers, at 2020 in March, the pandemic strikes. And I look at our business, and I've been through, this is history repeating itself or not. 2008 was a big crisis, right? And for me, it was a huge crisis, because 70% of our business went out the door. We got stiffed to $500,000. And I had just bought the company from the people that I had founded it with. So here I am on my own, without cash flow and without clients, but with a brand name. So I'm looking at 2020 like I did at 2008. I'm going, oh my God. So what are we going to do here? And so my response, because of 2008 and because of other crises, is I don't know how we're going to do, but I know that I can help some other people, and chances are they're in a worse case than we are. So that's where I reached out to, and this is a long way I'm going to get to, I promise, what I'm proud of. So I reached out to a bunch of chief marketing officers that I know, because I've interviewed so many over the last 10 years. It's like over 450. And I reached out to them and I said, I'm thinking right at this moment that you would really like to talk to some other CMOs about how they're dealing with all this stuff that's coming down on a weekly basis. They said, you're right, Drew, I would. So between April 1st, 2020 and October 1st, 2020, we met 55 times with a group of about, I'm going to say 7 to 20 different CMOs. And it was so clear there was a need there. And it was also so clear that this was like my calling after all these years as a marketer, as an agency runner. But I am the guy who can bring CMOs together and help them do their jobs better, and maybe drive purpose in their organizations, and maybe save the world on the process. So it's sort of, this is, if you think about for me, and I'm just getting started with Huddles, because we officially opened it for businesses, subscription business in 2020 with about 20, and now we have over 90, and we're still, we're adding 5 to 10 a month. That I'm incredibly proud of. And I'm really proud, and it's so purposeful for me. But I have to say, I didn't see it coming, and I did, 250 podcasts without any idea where it was going to go. but the podcast led directly to Huddles. The articles I've done for the years, I never knew where they were going to go other than I enjoyed doing the interviews. Anyway, so I'm really proud of CMO Huddles, and we're just getting started. So that's a long-winded answer to what I'm proud of.
No, it was a great answer. And it actually led me to another question. You mentioned that the people that have worked at Renegade many times say that it's been their favorite place to work. Why do you think that is?
I think it's probably because I'm not a killer. I'm really not. I am not the person that's just like, get it done or you're fired, and sometimes to the detriment of the agency, but I never cared. One of the advantages of owning your own shop, and I don't have a board of directors. I don't have any investors, and I can make choices like, you know what? I'm going to take it on the chin for something being late because some employee didn't want to work on a weekend. I'm okay with that. And I'll just do it and protect my employees first. And, I think that it wasn't necessarily the formula to build, 1,000-person agency, but I never wanted to build 1,000-person agency. I wanted to build an agency. And it's funny, the larger we got when we were our biggest, it was my least favorite time at the agency. Because we got over 100. And once you get over 100, you don't know everybody. You don't know, you're no longer family. And I think that's the thing for me clearly as I look at business as an extended family. I'm needy.
Do you think it's possible to have an organization that's large, that still has that family feel?
Yeah, kinda. I mean, I think you have to be a lot more disciplined about the culture of the organization and more methodical about how you would do it. I know of a number of organizations. I talk about one of them in my book, Park Mobile, who really and they had, imagine going through the pandemic where the first 6 months of the pandemic, nobody's parking. There's no business for them, but they kept everybody together and they already had a really strong employee first culture. And they're there's several hundred people now and they've come out of the pandemic stronger. And I think it's because the culture is so employee first, and they do a lot of smart things. I talk about that in the book a lot, about how important it is to engage employees first as part of your marketing plan. And so I'm a big believer in that, and it's very culture driven. So the answer is yes, to a point.
And you've mentioned your book a couple of times.
Yep.
Renegade marketing. What is renegade marketing?
So it's really a mindset. It's a mindset that says that if you have these 4 traits of courage, artful, thoughtful, and scientific, you're a cat, cool cats, as I call them. It's a mindset that you are absolutely committed to these 12 steps of clearing away the clutter and daring to be distinct. And it's an acceptance that marketing can really have a very positive impact on your company, on your culture, on your customers, and of course, the world. Now, it's not a book about driving purpose, while I do use that term, because I think you can have big P purpose and a little p purpose. But it's really about thinking just a little bit different. And that's what the CATS framework is about. And the CATS framework actually came from my first book, where I had 64 different CMOs that I interviewed, and I created this periodic table for marketers. And people asked me after that book, so Drew, I can't, you can't give me 64 traits. You got to narrow it down. So looking at it, I realized that if you're a courageous thinker, and to build a courageous strategy, and you're artful in the way you ideate, and you're thoughtful in the way you execution, this goes right back to Ben Franklin, and well done is better than well said, and then you use the scientific method, which you could also say is Franklin, you then are a renegade marketer. And those 4 traits are what defines one. And if you miss any of those, chances are as a chief marketing officer, you're going to fail. But even if you're a CEO of a small organization and you're trying to figure out, well, I got to drive marketing and I got to do this, you need all 4 of these things, or you won't succeed in our very challenging business world. So, and then the book is all about, it's just case after case after case, written in a, as close to a novel-like style as I could do it. With sort of some level of suspense in each of the stories, and so that you really would enjoy the experience and would want to be a renegade marketer when you were done.
Well, what inspired you to write your book?
So I love that question. And it's sort of 4 years ago, a little bit more than 4 years ago. Again, remember, I talk to a lot of marketers. I interview a CMO every week for my podcast or some other thing. And this was even before the CMO Huddles, I was interviewing CMOs. And what I noticed was that B2B marketing was getting ridiculously complicated. And I would talk to a client of ours and they'd say, well, we're targeting 14 personas and we've got 10 channels that we're communicating to, and we have different messages in all of these things. And I thought, this can't be right. This just can't. And so we did a study in 2019 and then did it again in 2020 just to find out how complicated has marketing got. Well, 90% in both 2019 and 2020 of the CMOs, it was about 230 that we surveyed, said, yeah, marketing has gotten ridiculously complicated in the last 12 to 24 months. And the causes are data and channel choices. And, they put it on all these tactics. And what in my mind is I put it on them and said, okay, so how do we fix that? Is there a way that we could actually radically simplify B2B marketing? Was that a pipe dream or not? So the first thing I did was we sort of looked at our process at Renegade and we broke it down into the 12 steps that I describe in the book. And we started applying it to our own business and to our clients' business. And we started testing it to see if it would work. And it was like, oh, this really works. This is pretty cool. Wow, we can create a plan on a page. Wait, one plan that gives you targets, employees, customers, and prospects, and we can show the whole thing there. That's one page. That's a radically simplified idea. So, and so we did that. And then I went on the road and talked to a bunch of CMOs. And this is sort of me, imagine an hour-long conversation where I'm the keynote speaker. And I sort of threw this out there and I gave them some of the examples. And what I saw was a lot of nodding heads. And so between the work that we were doing for our clients applying this thing, the research that indicated that marketing had gotten so much complicated, it was like, we'll fix it, solve the problem, radically simplify B2B marketing and figure out how do you get it down to its core traits of courage, heartful, thoughtful, and scientific, and then build that out into 3 steps within each of those. And so we had real world proof that it worked. And I had proof that the idea would resonate with marketers. And so I wrote the book, but I was done with a draft on like March 1st, 2020. And I was starting to think about it, what I was going to do with it. And the pandemic hit. And so I went, oh, God, well, I can't publish this for at least 6 months because I don't know if it's going to work after the pandemic, because events are off the table. We got to go to virtual. So I put the book on hold, but I took the 45,000 words and stripped it down to 15,000 words. And we created the mother of all blog posts. And we put that on our website. And you can go to the website, renegade.com, and you look at B2B brand strategy or whatever, and you'll find that report. And the amazing thing happened is that report was so well trafficked, and still is. We get 200 to 400 visitors a day coming in to read that report, 15,000 word report. And also had a huge impact on our SEO. But what that was more validation that this content is interesting, right? So then it was a case of I used all of 2020 and the first half of 2021 to sort of get more cases and validate it even further and test it and refine it. And so the book that came out on October 5th is just so much better than the book that I had done in February 2020. And I'm so glad I waited, but so it's a long time between books. My first one came out in 2015. That wasn't my plan, because by the way, my third book will be about Ben Franklin.
Nice.
And that's all. And by the way, that's the only book I've ever wanted to write.
Prior to hitting record on this interview, we had a little chat, and one of the things that kind of struck me is you mentioned that you really liked the title From Embers to Excellence, and that for you that it resonated with you, and I was wondering if you could share some of your past experiences that really, and it sounded like you probably have some with Renegade where the business was ebbing and flowing, and it sounds like one of them was when the pandemic hit.
Yeah. Oh, I got a lot of examples. I mean, and it's so it could go all the way back to I didn't get into the college that all my family went to. That was one. It's like, okay, now what? And that's why I'm so grateful to Duke for letting me in, because that was such a perfect school for me. But you think this is what you want, and then you get something else and you go, oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, the woman, the first woman I proposed to turned me down, and boy, was I lucky in that one, and mainly because it was a perfectly wonderful person, but not the right person for me. And I had sort of created a fantasy around because it's a long story and irrelevant, but it was a case where I thought this was the right thing and it didn't work out. And it turned out that was really what was wonderful. There was a period of time in advertising and early in my career where I lost 4 jobs in 2 years. And that taught me a couple skills. One, really look in the mirror and say, well, what are you good at and what's going wrong here? And some of it was just dumb luck and some of it was of my own doing. But secondly, I got really good at finding jobs and interviewing, and that was a skill. But I also got really understood how important it was, to have a network and help everybody when they're in between. And so I have, throughout my career, the minute I hear anybody has lost their job, I call them or I email them and say, let's set up a call. And I've been doing that for a long, long time. You make friends that way. It's sort of make a deposit in the Goodwill Bank, because so many people helped me during that period of time. So that was a big, sort of moment. And part of that also said to me, all right, when I lost those jobs, I said, you're either going to have your name on the door, which is an expression of be the head of an agency before you're 40, or you're going to get out of the damn business, because it's just, and sure enough, I was lucky enough that I was working for a division of Dentsu, and they said, hey, Drew, would you like to start a new division to go after Panasonic? And I said, sure, with an if, and that was, or a but, if you will, which was, the world doesn't, need another advertising agency. Can we be a little different? They said, we don't care, just go get Panasonic business. And we said, okay. So our original concept was the anti-gray. And that worked really, really well for 15 years. That's what became Renegade. The first big crisis at Renegade I've sort of described to you was in 2008. That's on December 17th, I'll never forget this story. So I got a call, and it was a client. He said, hey, Drew, how are you? And I said, oh, I'm fine. How are you? And he said, well, not so good. And said, well, that $500,000 that we owe you. And I said, oh yeah, I kind of know it pretty well. It's for a project that we're about to go live with in about a month, and it's going to put our agency back on the map again. It's an incredible program. He goes, yeah, well, you heard of the Madoff scandal. Well, one of our investors and founders lost $10 million. And so they're not going to be able to pay you, and they're not paying us, and we're not paying you. So have a nice day. So that was how we lost that $500,000. And I had just bought the company like 47 days earlier. And that was our cash flow. And then we knew our largest client was leaving, which is why I was able to buy the company on the cheap. And then what I didn't know is we were about to go in the worst recession since 1929. So that's an embers moment, because we had to obviously scale the agency way down. And then I brought the team together and said, okay, so here's the survival strategy. We're going to narrow what we do down to content and social was very early in the 2008 period. And we're going to live and die by that. So that's when I started writing regularly. And I said, all right, I'm going to write a blog post or an article every week. And so I got the discipline of writing an article every week. And that has opened up so many doors over the years. And that's how I started interviewing. Once you commit to writing an article every week, what you'll find is, well, I don't have that many ideas in my head. I better start interviewing people to get this content. And so that's when I started interviewing chief marketing officers. And that's almost all the goodness at this point in my career, is because I started doing that without knowing where it was going to go, but realizing it would help our strategy one way or another. And so that's a couple of ashes to embers. And then again, here comes the recession or here comes the pandemic. And I go, oh, by the way, I mean, there was the blackout, there was 9/11, and we had, at the time of 9/11, we had 45 people in the office, and I had to make sure that every single one of them got home. And we're all in a moment of shock there. And then it occurred to me, I was frustrated by this because it was like deer in the headlights. I said, there's something we can do. There's something we can do. And fortunately, we had two clients at the time, Panasonic and IBM, and we just called them and said, hey, there's something we can do here. And Panasonic rushed batteries down there, and IBM rushed computers down there. So that was something, right, that we were able to do. And so this notion that a crisis is an opportunity has become embedded in me because of that sort of 9/11, because of 2008. So in 2020, it was like, okay, pandemic. Okay, business is going to suck. Who knows what's going to happen? And that's sort of led me right into Huddles. And here we are a year and a half later, and I'm helping to grow what is the most amazing community that I've seen.
That's incredible. What do you think the biggest lesson through this CMO Huddles and the pandemic, and really having to shift gears? What do you feel is the biggest lesson or the biggest takeaway that down the road you'll be able to share, and like, because there's some wisdom that comes with having lived through all of this. And I'm just wondering, for you, what is that you're going to pass on?
I'm telling you, I read the book, and you read those first 3 chapters, which are clear away the clutter. And so what did I do in March 2020, right as the pandemic? I said, okay, what matters? What do you got? And who can you help? Right? So it was strip everything away. Don't worry about that. Who can you help? And so the guiding philosophy for CMO Huddles every single day is like, is this good for CMOs? So, and the team that's working on this, and they'll say, hey, Drew, what should we do here? Like, somebody wants to talk to one of our huddlers, and I say, is it good for the huddler? And so it's really simple, but that's because we cleared away the clutter. We said, this is all we do. We help CMOs share, care, and dare each other to greatness. Share, care, dare. Those are 3 principles. Now, and by the way, dare to be distinct. We got a distinct logo. We've got a great little name, but the experience is distinct. And so we build that into it. And then the purpose of, CMO Huddles is share, care, dare, right? Share, bring together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. Okay. So those are the 3 lessons. It's like, clear away the clutter, dare to be distinct, and pounce on your purpose. And that's what a courageous strategy is. And, we put it to work for CMO Huddles, and we've seen it work for Renegade clients. Then from there, it's just about, okay, how do you execute? How do you get to, how do you fill it, make it real? But those are, to me, the biggest lessons and it's just when I go in, and if I'm a sometimes CMOs hire me as a coach. And what I see more often than not is the peanut butter effect. They're spread too thin. They either have too many direct reports, they have too many things, and they have not mastered the art of saying no, which is what strategy is. Strategy is about saying no, and it's harder than it sounds. But there's always nice ways of doing it. Like, that's a great idea. We're going to add that to our list for the next quarter. But right now, we're focused on this because we've cleared away the clutter, and we've agreed that we're going to clear away the clutter. And in the book, I actually have at the end of the chapter, I have a pledge that I ask everybody in the reading of the book to take. And part of that pledge is that if somebody asks you, whatever you add to your list, you take something off. And so it's funny because I stopped making lists. And now it's like, if it's not on my calendar, it's not an action item. I'm looking to see if, here's clear away the clutter. I will focus relentlessly on a handful of strategic priorities. I will have the courage to say no to distractions. I will delegate everything except the things only I can do that move the organization forward. I won't add to my to-do list without taking something off of it. And I will block off 30 minutes a day to think for thinking big. So that's the end of chapter 1. But I will tell you, you could stop reading right there. Just put that list up there and use that if you're running a business and you do those things.
It struck me when you were going through that it's really written for chief marketing officers, but it's more of a philosophical way of thinking that is applicable to so many different walks of life.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that we all are brands. We all have to dare to be distinct as individuals. That, you have your show, you have your philosophy, you were reinforcing that with Embers to Excellence, right? That's who you are and part of your brand. And I think everybody as an individual it makes those choices as well. And so, yes, I agree with you that as a sort of philosophical underpinning to a successful business life, those are pretty good things.
Yeah. Where's the best place to get your book? Amazon or?
Amazon. Yep. Amazon.com, Renegade Marketing. Yep. Ebook, the paperback, the audiobook, which I actually read, which, oh, by the way, is really hard. If you decide to do an audiobook, we should talk about that because, even though we're both podcasters, reading is a very different art form. And I like to think of myself as expressive and energetic. It was just hard work. And I don't think I was very good at it. So, but I did it because I've recorded 260 podcasts, and I figured the people who listen to the show will probably listen to the audiobook, and it'll be weird if it wasn't my voice.
Yeah, I do plan on reading my book and doing the audio. I've had a lot of people encourage me to do it, and I would love to talk to you about it because it does seem a little daunting.
It is. It's, depending on how long your book is. Well, for me, it was 6 90-minute sessions plus a 7th, like 10-minute for what they call the pickups. But I never got through a single paragraph without having to reread some part of it. It's just, it's just funny how it is. But I worked with a great producer and our production manager, and he coached me through it. Oh, the other thing about it, really important. Here's an inside tip. Record it before you go to press. And the reason is you will find typos in your book, no matter how well it's been proofread. And I've talked to a number of folks that my audio engineer actually said he's never had a reading where they didn't find at least 5. And fortunately for us, we were able to find, and then of course we did find one typo after the fact, which is frustrating, but there's almost impossible to put out 45,000 words without a typo. But you'll find most of them when you do the audio. That's a funny tip.
Your website, where the blog is, what
Right.
is the
It's
website?
renegade.com.
Renegade.com. All right.
Right. And the book website is renegademarketing.com. You can get there through renegade.com. There is one other edition, a very special. So this is a funny little marketing thing. So I have a hardcover in my hands, and the way I'm sort of describe it after you're done reading the paperback or whatever, I say, by the way, if you go to renegademarketing.com and you go through the process and you build your plan on the page, and if you want to spend 45 minutes with me afterwards talking about how to pull this plan together, I'll also send you an autographed copy of the hard book. So for a wonderful price of $333, you get 45 minutes of consulting with me after you've gone through the book and read it and put it to work. So anyway, I have this hardcover, the most expensive hardcover that I've heard of that comes with a consulting.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, before we part ways, do you feel there's anything that we should touch on that we haven't talked about yet?
One of the things in the book that when we get to this chapter of this section called thoughtful execution, and I'm going to put this out there whether you're in marketing or not, but I think it's a philosophy that is really important. So we live in what I call the give to get economy. And that is where almost everybody who is communicating to another individual has to give something of value in order to get their attention. And, the simplest way to think about it is Google gives you access to all the documents in the world. You give them their eyeballs, right? So there's this give to get thing. And so if you think about your business challenge or your personal challenge, and you think about it and frame it in the context of what could I give to this individual that would be of value, that would enable us to have a conversation later on where eventually they say, so what do you do? Right. And how do we, and pretty much my last 10 years have been built on figuring out what can I do of value for our prospects. And so that's why I started writing about them. It's like, oh, well, I can get to know them. I can sort of hear them talk. I can write about them and get some brand exposure for them. And of course that led to Huddles. So this notion of selling through service is a lot more profound than that alliteration happens, because it's a philosophy that you can apply to almost any situation, which is don't ask what you're going to get. Figure out what you can give in almost any situation of any business. And, it's even if you're talking to your wife and she's got a problem, what she needs at that moment is a hug. She doesn't need advice. So that's what you're going to give to get. And so this idea of sell through service, and it's funny because during the huddles in June, I think it was, one of the CMOs said that they had developed this program that was helping their customers during the pandemic, and they kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And they said that, she said, the more I help, the more we sell, and the less hard we try to sell, the more we sell. And I thought, oh my God, that's the idea here, is that we're going to sell through service. We're going to do so much and be so focused on a group of people that we're going to give them. And in the process, you all feel good. Everybody feels good about that. So it's like, be a giver. That chapter 9, while sell through service is in, when I think about it, it feels sell is a bad word. But philosophically, I'm really saying give, be a giver.
So many things that you've said today translate, or I mean, it just parallels a lot of the stuff that I teach in my leadership courses, where, I'm talking about small groups up to, whole battalions and small businesses. But the mindset is essentially what you're saying, that that giving of yourself actually improves the team and you gain from that. And that mindset of giving without an expectation or even knowing what you're going to get back is pretty profound.
I think so. And I think one of the interesting sort of byproducts of the pandemic, and this was fascinating to me in the early stages of Huddles, when we were still in beta, and was that some of the CMOs were saying, God, I have to be so much more empathetic now. because you were dealing with your employee had 2 kids at home and they were under 5 and there was no nanny and there was no school and life was taking over. And if they were the hard charging leader of 2 years ago, it's like, God, I mean, here's the goals, get it done. They were going to fail. And I thought it was ironic that it took a pandemic for a leader to realize they need to be empathetic, but I don't care. They got there. Yeah. But I really think that there's a whole group of leaders who've woken up in a way because they now have no choice. And given the great, what do they call it? Resignation, it's even more so. Because if you're working for someone who isn't empathetic, who doesn't seem to care about you as an individual, they're going to leave. And so, we come back this full circle, and what it means to be a leader today, I think is a little bit different. The command and control and this is why I'm going to go all the way back to the Sun Sea and the thing you were talking about at Yale. All of those arguments are all about command and control. And that's what the sort of war leadership is about. Well, marketing, business leadership today is not command and control.
It's interesting that you're talking about that, because really there's been a lot of studies and a lot of things written that really reinforce the fact that the empathetic piece, the emotional intelligence piece of leadership is the most important component. Yeah. That as far back as, I know that there's been books written on leaders in World War I and World War II, all the way up to present. These military leaders, the ones that the soldiers and sailors and Marines would follow them to the ends of the earth, it was because they knew that the person they were following genuinely cared about them and cared about their well-being. There's books being written. There's actually Dan Goleman is the one who coined the term emotional intelligence. And, those are several of his books were books that I studied in college, and we're still finding leaders of organizations that, I don't know, just dismiss it. It's not like it isn't readily available. That knowledge isn't readily available. What do you think is the cause of that?
When in doubt, follow the money. And so I think there are a lot of companies out there that are not being built to last. They were being built to be sold. And so you have a time frame. So if you're building a company to last, then you have to have an employee-driven culture, right? But if you're building a company that you're going to flip because it's VC or venture backed, or you're planning to go public and a few people are going to make a lot of money, then you can be a command control. You don't need the empathy, because then you just keep your eye on the bottom line and being able to create a story that it looks like this is a company that can outperform, and therefore, so you have to follow the money, I think, is really a very simple way of looking at it. And if you look at certain private organizations, one of the companies I talk a lot about in the book is Case Paper. It's a family-owned business for 75 plus years. And it's a family. And they have 400 plus employees, but they run it very differently, and they make their decisions very differently, and they talk about in a very different way than and they have a sense of humor. But, if you go to the next level up of a company they compete with, it's either publicly held or, it's a roll up of things, and that you have a very different structure where it is, it's about financial acumen and getting the math to work so that someone will buy it. It's very different philosophically. So I think it's very simple to look at business that way. And, you look at other companies, like Salesforce is an amazing one because, they've had the same philosophy when they were starting up, which is, we're going to the 1-1-1, or is it the 10-10-10, whatever it was, I can't remember, but it's about, 1% of employee, we're going to give 1% of our revenue always to charity, 1% of our time of employees' time or something like, and that philosophy has always imbue the organization, and you still have the founder at the helm, right? And his philosophy has held. Be interesting to see, if a CEO ever steps down, if that company remains as sort of seemingly committed to, making employees a top priority, and not just shareholder value, right? So follow the money.
Drew, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. I've gained a lot from this conversation, and I'd really love to stay in touch with you. And I like the idea of getting the most expensive hardcover book.
Well, that's available on renegademarketing.com. You can go in there, but I really strongly encourage the ebook is on sale at this very second, but, read the book, go through the exercise, and then the payout will be real. And that's why I've set it up this way. Cause it is I think there's a lot to talk about in the context of someone's business.
Thank you so much. And
All right.
I'll have your website on my website and in the show notes, and look forward to talking to you on a personal level.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much. As I said at the beginning of the show, I really appreciate your show and what you're doing, and keep going. I mean, it is about coming from embers to excellence. I mean, life is, it's a journey, and it wouldn't be interesting if there weren't some challenges along the way. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform, and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.